All right. It says I'm live. So, of course, I always like to check since in the past there have been times where that wasn't the case. So, let me know if you can hear me and see me. And then luckily we can, move forward and start talking about some of the events that we want to discuss tonight. So, I do want to say it's good to see everybody. It looks like we've got Mike McDonald here, Florida Sheepdog 1, Gen X Gemini's in the house, Mike H as well, USMC Devil Dog 0311. Thanks for being here. Thank you for modding. And yes, I have some confirmation of being actually live thanks to Vanessa Stoller. 5x5 coming through. William Mudge also says 5x5. And Eagle Claw 6 says I need to move a time zone closer. Well, you never know, because I'm making my way around the entire country, apparently, based on previous moves. So we'll see where I end up next. But Jordan, sub to you as well. And then we also have Cops Help Americans. Good to see you. Oath Taker 276. Hey, y'all. Hey, you as well. And good to see everyone. I do want to mention Midway USA is the biggest supporter of the channel. Thanks to them, I can do live streams like this one, as well as get out on the range, test out equipment, and give you my findings. Honestly, even if it doesn't align with what everybody wants to hear. So big thanks to Midway USA. And of course, the live streams specifically are sponsored by magicprepperbeef.com, which is not a website where I go and talk trash to everybody I don't like, but it is a place you can get high-quality freeze-dried beef products that'll store for minimum 10 years, but up to 25, and they come pre-packaged and ready to just sit on your shelf for an emergency. This is expensive stuff, so if you use code MAGICPREPPER, you get 15% off. And here's how you can equate it. This costs per pound the same as a steak dinner costs if you go out and have one right now. So you get to decide, do I want a steak dinner right now in times of relative peace, or do I want a steak dinner during the apocalypse and pay about the same? So that's how you can kind of justify it if you want. Check out magicprepperbeef.com and use code MAGICPREPPER for that 15% off. Now, we have a lot to talk about tonight. It's kind of thin regarding the amount of articles that we usually go over, but it's all related to what's currently happening in Poland and how it should apply here in the United States, but is, of course, not being applied. And there's some things about, well, foreign entities entering the U.S. through our borders and some of the options that are on the table for us to actually deal with it, which could create even more calamity, which could be part of the plan, which is why I wanted to bring this up, because you have to think very strategically in almost a 5D type chess scenario in order to understand how our enemies might be trying to bring about our demise, because they most certainly are, but they're not going to do it kinetically in the same way that you would think a conventional war would be fought, because, well, that would be almost like a kamikaze type move. There's not much of a way out of that, right? The United States still has a superior military power. So they have to do things through alternative methods. And some of these methods we have to explore because they're viable. And the one we're going to talk about tonight could be an extreme disruptor if it ever comes to pass. And it's something that I'm actually concerned about just because of the fact that it is a viable option our government currently holds. When it comes to, let's just say, foreign enemies on our soil that aren't supposed to be here, and how we can deal with the fact that there might be a large population of them here once a actual war breaks out with their country of origin. And that's something that we have to discuss, okay? So, let's see here. Grisio Nemo says, things are being weird. I froze at first. I don't doubt it. Now, I am hardwired. Internet's good, but I am experiencing some storms right now, so we'll see how it goes. Let's see here. Vegas Backyard Prepper finally made it to a live stream. Well, I'm glad you made it, and I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for hanging out. And hopefully, if you're new here, you all can come back every week. This is where we have these conversations. Or if you're on the replay crew, you're awesome. I always appreciate you. Make sure you check in the comments so I know you guys come back and actually watch this stuff. And then at the same time, if you don't mind hitting the subscribe button, the thumbs up, and all that good stuff, it just helps things move along, right? So, Majestic Lion, hello, peeps to you as well, because you can be peeps if you'd like. Let's get moving. Let's talk about what Poland's doing first to set up some context here as to what you should really be considering when it comes to this hybrid warfare threat that Poland is extremely concerned about. And some people here in the U.S. are, but not everybody. And that's also problematic in my opinion, okay? So this is from Politico. Their Europe division, of course. Okay. Poland to bolster eastern borders to curb irregular migration from Belarus. I know it's Belarus, but still. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk says the country faces a hybrid war in illegal migration. Now, I don't know if that sounds similar to anything you might have thought about happening here in the United States, but to me it sounds relatively similar. And that's why you should be questioning why we aren't approaching it in a similar fashion as Poland. Maybe it's because Poland feels like they're much closer to an active conventional war that's happening very close to their borders, but regardless, they are actually seeing things for how they are, whereas a lot of the United States is in denial of this actually being a real threat, which is why we're discussing it tonight, because this is a domestic issue, and it's something that we can learn from when it comes to this foreign entity actually taking it seriously, you might say, okay? So, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said Poland will strengthen its eastern border infrastructure to deter migrants entering from Belarus as the number of illegal crossing attempts increases. So they're seeing illegal crossing attempts increase from these people of foreign origin, and they're saying, well, we better strengthen the border now because things are getting a little bit concerning. Tusk said that Poland is facing a hybrid war in illegal migration from Belarus as he visited the village for Karakul on the border to meet with troops, according to the Polish press agency. There will be no limit of funds when it comes to the security of Poland, he said. Amazing how that works. There always seems to be an argument over how much of a budget we have here in the United States, but then we also just send money all over the place for any other person's security. But here we do have a limited amount for some reason. The Prime Minister reaffirmed his belief that Alexander Lukashenko's regime in Belarus is co-organizing this practice, as the country has been demonstrating increasingly aggressive intentions towards Poland. In 2021, Poland accused Belarus of letting in thousands of undocumented migrants through the border into the European Union, accusations that Belarus denies. This is starting to sound really familiar. I can't quite put my finger on it. But if you guys have any idea of what this sounds like to you and anything you might be able to relate it to, let me know in the chat because, I just can't seem to figure it out. Tusk on Saturday said that the bolstered fortifications would be along the entire eastern border, which could also include Ukraine and Russia. He gave no details on the planning. Belarus has also come under fire recently for its customs union with Russia. On Monday, the European Commission called for sweeping trade sanctions against Belarus, saying that concerns over food security should not be used as an argument to give Moscow's closest ally any exceptions, according to a proposal seen by Politico. Earlier this week, a high-level Polish judge sought political asylum in Belarus, saying the move was in protest against Poland's unjust and harmful policy toward Belarus and Russia. Now, the main takeaway here is that they're fortifying their border security infrastructure due to an increased influx of foreign nationals coming across their border, specifically from Belarus, who's being considered to be a foreign adversary at this point in time due to their close relations with Russia, right? I mean, I think that we can all agree that's the main takeaway from this particular situation. So, critically concerned says Donald Tusk is a globalist and NWO puppet. Well, anyone who has the platform to be able to speak from the position of prime minister or president or any other authoritarian office most likely fits that same bill, don't they? So, unfortunately, that's just where we are in the world right now. Let's see here. Mike H says it sounds like Nogales, Arizona. Okay, fair enough. Good evening to you, David Bladden. Good to see you. Kelly Gage, did you ever get your AAC ammo primer issue solved? Kelly Gage, I don't think it's necessarily an issue. I think that it's just something to be aware of. Like I said in that video, I didn't want to make anyone feel that the ammunition is necessarily subpar or not performing because I don't have enough of a case study to be able to say that for certain. But what I did want to really push, I guess the point to being is that if you're not going to test out a bunch of ammo before you invest heavily into it, you could find yourself regretting that purchase. So the whole goal of that video is to say, whatever you're going to stock up on in large quantities, maybe test out a small quantity first and decide whether or not it met your standards. And at least for my small amount of a test lot that I was using, didn't necessarily meet the standards that I would hope it would have met. So that's just where I was. Personally, I have other options that I'd rather invest in that I have tested more of without that many issues, and the ratio is much better in the sense of quality. Hope that kind of clears that up. So, now, that's what Poland's up to. They are doing what a lot of Americans wish we would do here on the southern border. And let me before we get to that, because we're going to talk about it tonight, but before we get to that, just remember, the northern border is a real problem too. And in some ways, more of a problem because the people who have the worst intentions for our country are aware of the fact that it's way less secure than even the southern border. But, like I said, we'll get to that here in a minute. So, let's jump into something that we're trying to do now. And based on what Poland is doing and based on what's happening in the world, this should not even be a question. This should have already been a thing. And this is something that the Biden administration is trying to accomplish suddenly, right, in the midst of an election cycle, that doesn't cover our bases, let's just say, okay? Mike H., FYI, the port of entry in Nogales is straight out of Blade Runner. Okay. I don't doubt it for a second. Everything about a lot of the southern ports of entry is very dystopian, isn't it? A new rule aims to speed up the removal of a limited group of migrants who don't qualify for asylum, all right? And just so you know, this article, as well as the previous one, all the articles discussed tonight are from within the previous week, in case you're new here and you're not aware of how we do things. And then if something is older and we're using it in order to frame context around a new piece of information, I will always make sure you're aware of that. So, a new Biden administration rule announced Thursday aims to speed up asylum processing at the southern border for a limited group of people believed to have committed serious crimes or who have terrorist links and ultimately more quickly eject them from the country. The change comes as the administration has been struggling to demonstrate to voters during an election where immigration is a key issue that it has a handle on the southern border. Republicans have consistently slammed the Biden administration over policies that they say have worsened the problems at the southern border. In a statement announcing the changes, the Department of Homeland Security said migrants who are deemed to pose a public threat are taken into custody, but a determination on whether they're eligible for asylum isn't made until later in the asylum process. Under the proposed rule, asylum officers hearing cases at an initial screening stage called credible fear screening that's intended to happen just days after a person arrives in the country will now be able to consider that criminal history or terrorist links when deciding whether someone should ultimately be removed from the country. Now they'll be able to consider it. They couldn't before. This rule is hoping that this will help that whole process. Is that not how it should have always been? I just don't know if we're being reasonable about basic logic any longer. So our borders are completely unsecure. Poland recognizes what's happening to them, hybrid warfare that's being waged against them due to illegal migration, right? We are calling it an administrative issue, right? This is an issue for us in the sense of just not quite having what we need in order to really vet and verify everybody that's coming through. And this is problematic, okay? So this will allow DHS to expeditiously remove individuals who pose a threat to the United States much sooner than is currently the case, better safeguarding the security of our border and our country. Obviously not enough. And so the reason I wanted to show you that article and to demonstrate or tell you about this new rule that the Biden administration is putting into place, which by the way, still has a 30-day comment period that it has to go through in order to, verify what the public thinks about such a rule. So it's not going to be active at any point in time, anytime soon. And so during that time, everything's still going to just be the way it is right now. No one's taking any of that security seriously, which definitely makes you question motives, right? Why are people so willing to leave this unsecure? And what's the benefit of having such an unsecure border for those who might be in charge and might want to seem like they care about security, right? So there's a lot of questions there, of course. But anyway, that's the difference. So now you can see how one country that's nearby a conventional war is taking their border security and how they think about this illegal migration surge that they're currently seeing. Whereas another country that doesn't think it's involved anywhere close to a conventional war, even though we're currently funding multiple proxy wars that are indeed very conventional, for some reason doesn't take that same border security to heart, right? How do we prepare for domestic planted terrorists? David Bailly says. Well, there's only so much you can do. Building community is a huge part of it because, well, you're going to need each other if that ever becomes a real threat. And secondly, obviously having a well-rounded skill set when it comes to dealing with such threats, right? And I think one of the most overlooked ones in that skill set range would be medical. And I think, learning more first aid is always going to be a key component in order to respond to any type of an attack, regardless of its nature, right? So, let's see here. let's jump. I just like to jump in the chat every so often. Vincent Boogaloo says, I call it an invasion. Many do, and there's a good reason behind that, of course. And of course, invasions don't have to be absolute. And when I say that, what I mean is that not everybody who is crossing the border right now has to be part of an invasion. They can easily provide cover for one, though, right? And that's obviously a lot of what's happening. The more people that come through, the harder it is to find the ones who are actually part of the malicious force. Kind of like the Trojan Horse, right? I think we all know how that worked out. So let's jump into why this should matter and why we should be taking that border security more seriously, especially to the degree that Poland is regarding a hybrid warfare scenario that they're currently concerned about. Here is an article from May 12th, so yesterday. This is what I was trying to explain about the northern border earlier, okay? And of course, everyone wants me to subscribe and pay for everything nowadays. It's okay, it's just part of the deal. We're all in the same boat. Terrorist watch list apprehensions at northern border continue to break records. There have been 143 KSTs apprehended, or known or suspected terrorists, by the way, apprehended at the northern border through the first 6 months of the fiscal year. Okay? That doesn't sound like a lot. But you also have to ask yourself, how much could 143 of these people do, especially if they were to group up in one area? All right. The number of known or suspected terrorists apprehended at the northern border in the first 6 months of fiscal 2024 continues to outpace those apprehended at the southwest border. And that's something a lot of people might not be aware of. There are more KSTs being apprehended at the northern border than the southern border. And that should tell you a lot. Why are they using the northern border more often? Well, obviously because of security. And why would they specifically be choosing that way of entry if they're known terrorist suspects, right? Consider that. This is what's happening, okay? All right, there have been 143 KSTs apprehended at the northern border through the first 6 months of this fiscal year compared to 92 at the southwest border. And imagine how much more security and how much more investment and infrastructure is placed at the southern border compared to the northern right now. So for the northern border to be able to apprehend that many compared to the southern border when they have much more funding and much more infrastructure in order to do so, how many more are getting through that aren't being apprehended? Because that ratio, I guarantee you, is extremely skewed when it comes to the amount of funding and the amount of law enforcement versus the amount of arrests, okay? So, those apprehended are known to law enforcement and in the National Terrorist Screening Dataset, a federal database that contains sensitive information on terrorist identities. It originated as a consolidated terrorist watch list to house information on known or suspected terrorists, but evolved over the last decade to include additional individuals who represent a potential threat to the United States, including known affiliates of watchlisted individuals, CBP explains. This is after the greatest number of foreign nationals were apprehended illegally entering through the northern border than at any time in U.S. history during the same time period, the Center Square reported. The greatest number of KSTs to ever be apprehended in U.S. history was at the northern border in fiscal 2023 at 484. The next greatest number to be apprehended in U.S. history was 313 at the northern border in fiscal 2022. Year after year, people who are known or suspected terrorists are infiltrating through the northern border at a much higher rate and being apprehended there at a higher rate, but with much less law enforcement, infrastructure, surveillance, and investment, right? They don't have the financial resources you see at the southern border. We're talking about different states with different politics, and we're talking about a much larger border, in all honesty, when it comes to all of, most of New England as well as all of the northern states. I mean, North Dakota has a massive border with Canada, and I'll tell you, there aren't a ton of Border Patrol vehicles patrolling it. So this is actually a big deal because not only are they getting more people arrested, but generally that number coincides with an overall rise in the number of those types of people who are trying to enter the country. So because of that, you can extrapolate that data and say that there's likely more and more of these types of people coming into the country, likely with a purpose, right? And that's probably not a good thing. Overall, the greatest combined number of KSTs apprehended at both the northern and southern borders was in fiscal 2023 at 736. And so last year, we had the most ever reported, and 736 people. That was only the ones they actually arrested. How many got through. If they arrested almost 800, how many actually made it through? And how much damage could 800 of these people do if they were to be activated? And even though we know that some of these cells already exist here in the country, how many more people do they need in order to accomplish whatever goal it is that they have? And these are all questions you should be asking yourself, because this is not insignificant. The numbers sound insignificant when considered with the overall total amounts of immigration happening at these borders, right? The illegal immigration occurring there is much larger just in numbers than what the amount of people being apprehended that are on this list are. But it doesn't take much to hurt our infrastructure, does it? Not much at all. And 736 people could do a lot of damage, a ton. So just keep that in mind, because this is what's happening. The alarming conclusion from these numbers is every day we have individuals that are on the FBI terrorist watch list that could have an intention to harm our country and are entering every single day. Former Border Patrol Chief Mark Morgan told the Center Square. It's not if or when the threat tries to come to our country. We already know that's happening already. The threat is already here, he said, referring to the at least 2 million gotaways, those who illegally entered the country and evaded capture. While total illegal entries at the northern border are minuscule compared to the southwest border, the threat is not, he said. While there are shortages of resources across the board, the northern border doesn't have the infrastructure, technology, personnel that the southwest border does. The northern border represents a threat. And that's what I've been saying. And that is something that we should all be very aware of, okay? All the attention gets sent to the southern border for obvious reasons, because, well, it's a much larger influx of overall illegal immigration, right? And it's also, there's a lot of political posturing and a lot of Border Patrol interaction happening down there. And we also have Mexico, which is, obviously a huge perpetrator of illegal border crossings when it comes to the people who are coming across. But they also house the criminal cartels that are funding a lot of these human smuggling operations, as well as the drug running operations. So there's a lot of action at the southern border. But the northern border is our back door, right? It's the back door that was left open in order to allow whatever might come through. I know some of you are sick in the head, and I know exactly what you're thinking now. All right, so Exile Reviews. I don't see us getting put in prison camps. Not sure where you're coming from on that, but I do appreciate you being here. Thanks for modding tonight. I'm not planning on going to one ever, which could be bad for my health one day, but we'll see how that goes. But what I will say is that part of the solution to some of these problems has feelings that resemble prison camp status, let's just say. And I'm not saying this is the solution we should choose. I'm saying it's a solution that is available. And because it's available, there's a possibility it gets used. And because it might get used, you should try to think further than just whether or not we should do it. And you should think past into why would someone want us to do it? And that's something that you could really start to consider when it comes to why all these people are flowing into our country and how many of them might be involved with a country we could find ourselves at war with here at some point in time, right? So let's talk about other interesting ways that people are trying to get into our country illegally, to just show you how well organized, how well funded, and how creative they're getting when it comes to these situations, and just how dangerous this can be based on the fact that they are actually fooling us in many, many ways. Okay, this isn't going to be something easy to stop. So check this out. This is from San Antonio. And I just thought this was really interesting because this is from yesterday. And this is how things are going down. Everybody thinks this is a simple solution in many ways, but it's not when stuff like this is happening. Alleged scheme to smuggle migrants into U.S. via air ambulance lands suspect behind bars. Now, I just want to use this story as a way to demonstrate the length at which they're willing to go, as well as the funding and the infrastructure that they have access to and the willingness they have in order to accomplish their goals, right? So, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton announced the arrest of a suspect who is allegedly using a fake nursing home as a front for migrant smuggling. On Thursday, authorities with the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit of the Texas Office of the Attorney General, alongside the Department of Homeland Security, arrested Jesus Cantu Trevino for conspiracy to smuggle undocumented migrants via air ambulance. The Attorney General's office alleges that Trevino used a fictitious assisted living facility along with Skyline Air ambulances as a means to transport individuals into the country illegally, circumventing border checkpoints. Always keep in mind, it's not just people that they can get across the border using methods like this, right? To use our taxpayer-funded healthcare system as a cover for assisting illegal immigration is completely disgraceful. Oh, you think so? As shown in this instance, exploitation of public programs for illegal alien trafficking will be met with the full force of the law. Yeah, but they did it, didn't they? And probably a lot. The Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, the Department of Homeland Security, and the Department of Health and Human Services are investigating the case. This is not child's play, right? These aren't people who are just getting a U-Haul truck, loading it up with people in the back, and trying their best to get across the border, right? Like, we're talking about elaborate schemes. You don't think that someone pulled off a fraudulent nursing home that had Medicaid's taxpayer funding and also had the ability to use air ambulances to smuggle people across the border. You don't think they just figure that out on their own without any funding or backing of any kind, do you? We know that these people are directly funded by cartels, who are directly in relation with China, who is funding them via fentanyl, right? So, like, all of this is intertwined. Why does all that matter? Well, we know we're catching known or suspected terrorists at the northern border at a higher rate than the southern border. We know where a lot of those terrorists are coming from, right? Middle Eastern countries in many ways. Obviously not all, but some, quite a few. And we also know that, Hamas, Hezbollah, all those lovely groups over there have basically, declared war on the United States in one form or another. Iran has said there's going to be retribution for aiding Israel, which we have done, obviously, quite a bit. And then we also have everything happening on college campuses and everything else regarding that. Whole nother story. But we also have the Chinese situation going on as well. And since they're intertwined, I would say that we could easily look at things in the same light as Poland and say, hey, this is hybrid warfare and using illegal migration as a weapon against us, right? So what do you do about that if you're not willing to build up more infrastructure? Or is there a reason why you wouldn't build up more infrastructure? Is there a reason why you would allow a certain amount of people into the country before acting? And would it cause more disruption, more chaos, and more political unrest than anything we've ever seen before? I would say yes, based on this information. What is it I'm talking about? Let's talk about it. Okay. Have you ever heard of the Alien Enemies Act? Probably not, but you might have. You can let me know in the chat if you have. But this article, which came out May 7th by George Fishman, it's from the Center of Immigration Studies, or Center for Immigration Studies, sorry. I found this interesting, but also concerning. And this is what takes me into a different realm of thought process, right? At face value, I could see people getting either excited or disgusted by this concept. But moving forward a few steps in this game of chess we're currently playing, you could see how this could be leveraged as a way to create some of the largest amount of civil unrest and civil disobedience that the country has ever seen, which would be checkmate for our foreign adversaries. This is what they want to see. I know that it's a hot topic and a hot concept to discuss because of all the political strife we experience here in the United States. But a civil war in the United States, or anything that even emulates one, is like the winning move for any of our foreign adversaries. That'd be the best case scenario for them, right? Like, that's how they win a war against the U.S. It's not by fighting us directly. It's by making us fight each other. And then hopefully they get to be, let's just say, France, right? Come in, offer support, military support, budget, financial support, everything else related to logistics, right? And then all you have to do is like work with them, amicably afterward, right? So that they have some ownership over what happens next in this country because, hey, well, we helped you win, right? So anyway, what am I talking about, okay? Short of declared war, can it be used to remove nationals of the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism? Interesting. The Iranian regime has been considered the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism by both Democrat and Republican administrations, with a unique place among the governments of the world in its use of terrorism as a central tool of statecraft. The Iranian regime has attempted terrorist attacks on American soil, with Americans, Iranians, and others its intended targets. Overseas, the regime's proxy forces have targeted and killed American soldiers and civilian contractors. Dedicated to the eradication of Israel, Iran is the primary state sponsor of Palestinian terrorist groups, including Hamas and Lebanon's Hezbollah terrorist state within a state. Argentina's highest criminal court recently ruled that Hezbollah, in furtherance of a political and strategic design by Iran, carried out the 1994 bombing of a Jewish community center in Buenos Aires that killed 85 people. There are at least 100,000 Iranian nationals present in the United States, both legally and illegally. Yet the U.S. government's available options to remove large numbers of Iranians, if necessary during time of conflict, are generally quite limited, both because of the statutory and constitutional rights their presence in the U.S. affords them, and because of the operational and resource obstacles involved in bringing thousands of deportation cases in vastly backlogged immigration courts. I know this is kind of long, but please bear with me because this is how you get the full picture, okay? There is another removal option of considerable power available to the government: the ability to detain and remove nationals of enemy states through the statutory power conferred by the Alien Enemies Act, should armed conflict arise. The AEA provides that whenever there is a declared war between the United States and any foreign nation or government, or any invasion or predatory incursion is perpetrated, attempted, or threatened against the territory of the United States by any foreign nation or government, all natives, citizens, denizens, or subjects of the hostile nation or government at least 14 years old and not having become naturalized U.S. citizens shall be liable to be apprehended, restrained, secured, and removed as alien enemies. The AEA was enacted in 1798 in reaction to a feared invasion by France, then in the throes of the infamous French Revolution. The Justice Department has explained that one of the measures of protection found by every nation to be most necessary in time of war is the guarding against internal enemies whose operations are more insidious and therefore more dangerous. In many cases, then are the active maneuvers of military forces. An army of spies, incendiaries, and propagandists may be more dangerous than an army of soldiers. I think in this current generation of warfare, we can all agree with that. Numerous federal courts, up to and including the Supreme Court, have upheld the AEA's constitutionality. Is there a foreseeable scenario short of a declared war under which the president could utilize the AEA against Iranian nationals, or a subset thereof, as an invasion or predatory incursion must be perpetrated, attempted, or threatened against U.S. territory? Attacks on U.S. troops or American citizens abroad would not qualify. As to attacks on American soil, a successful or attempted predatory incursion by Iran could give the president access to the AEA's detention and removal powers. As such, an incursion is best understood as the equivalent of a hostile raid. A terrorist attack perpetrated by Iran could trigger the AEA, as likely could an assassination or attempted assassination. Hold on, we're almost there, I promise. Okay? As the AEA only authorizes action against natives, citizens, denizens, or subjects of the hostile nation or government, Lebanese nationals, or a subset thereof, would not be subject to the AEA predicated on the acts of the Iranian government. However, they would be separately subject to an AEA action predicated on the acts of Hezbollah itself, but only if Hezbollah were found to qualify as the hostile nation or government. The Immigration and Nationality Act's statutory procedures and rights accorded to aliens would not apply to AEA detentions and removals. Under the AEA, as the Supreme Court has ruled, judicial review is only available regarding the construction and constitutionality of the statute, the existence of a triggering act by a hostile foreign government, and the existence of a qualifying relationship, nationality in most cases, between a particular alien and the enemy state. Yeah, I know that was a lot, okay? Here's what's interesting. This article is all about Iran. But it does mention China here, which we're going to go over in just one second. But I just want you to be aware of the fact that this exists. And this is something that can be used. And this is something that we would qualify to use based on some of the circumstances happening right now. And not many people have talked about it, which means that maybe it's been considered, right? Because this is not something anyone would want to talk about, because in many ways it would be like what? Political suicide, right? Which, oh, by the way, you're not supposed to say that on YouTube. So sorry for saying that word, I guess. But anyway, is what it is. I have previously pondered the unpleasant question of what happens if the People's Republic of China and the US go to war, and fretted over the executive branch's tenuous available options to remove already admitted students from the PRC under the specter of war. Should the students leave the US, proclamation by the president could certainly bar their return. However, it would be extremely difficult to remove those who choose to stay, both because of the statutory and constitutional rights their presence in the U.S. affords them, and because of the operational and resource obstacles involved in bringing thousands of deportation cases in vastly backlogged immigration courts. Should DHS attempt to deport a large number of students from the PRC pursuant to the foreign policy ground of deportability, there is a great risk that the federal courts would declare the ground unconstitutional. But I later realized that I had failed to consider an administration's ability to detain and remove nationals of enemy states through the statutory power commonly referred to as the Alien Enemies Act, should armed conflict arise. But use of the AEA is not only an option in times of conflict with the PRC, it is also regarding conflict with Iran. So, why did I just go over that really long-winded article and that really overly explanatory concept? Because that is actually an option. Mike H., that is the approved term. You're correct. I mistakenly said it here on a live, and we'll see how it goes. All right, so here's the thing. That act is meant to protect us in a time of war. And of course, we've seen things like that occur during World War II when it came to the internment camps regarding, Japanese Americans in this country. Not exactly the same action, but a very similar concept, right? Now, understand that I have little faith that this act would ever be used to the full force of what its potential is. But what I do understand is that it is there. And because it's there, well, the government likes to use powers it has access to, especially if it's not exactly sure what to do with itself. And one of the things you should be considering is the fact that if anyone was to use such an act and try to remove thousands of Americans or people who live in America via said act due to being in conflict or, right, like a perceived invasion from a foreign entity, what would that do to our current social structure based on the fact that people already can't even get along when it comes to a conflict that's happening thousands of miles away, right? It would be a linchpin in many ways, a huge one. And if I was to be a strategist who wanted to figure out a way to divide the U.S. even further and create even more strafe and turmoil and present a situation that might lead to such a decision, which would then tear a lot of the United States apart, one of the ways you could try to trigger said linchpin is by overly inundating the country with foreign nationals who are not vetted and possibly KSTs, and then create an active conflict scenario where the Alien Enemies Act might have to come into play. And then if that act were to come into play, you create a natural division and strife within the country for obvious reasons that then pushes the country to the brink of civil conflict, or at least the bare minimum civil disruption, while also dealing with the fact that a conflict is occurring with a foreign adversary from overseas. And I have zero doubts, because I don't know how I would feel about that exact act being enacted, right? Depending on the use case and everything else related to it. But the idea of rounding up, because it doesn't necessarily apply to people who are only here illegally, by the way. So keep that in mind, right? Very much like the Japanese Americans who dealt with everything during World War II. So there's a lot of reasons to be concerned about such a law being utilized in the future. And I don't put it past our adversaries to at least see if they can nudge that to try to be, a reality, right? Push it towards being used a little bit further every day. And if it never happens, well, they're still causing disruption and chaos and putting strain on the system. But if it does happen, wow, that paid off really well now, didn't it? And if you get the right political, let's just say, we'll call them puppets. If you get the right puppet into the right office and they're willing to go as far as using such an act based on what's expected from them, right? It's very possible that it could lead to a very, very contentious situation here in the United States. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to mention it, because I don't think people really realize it. To a lesser extent, it was used against Germans and Italians during World War II also. Yes, Root Cellar, that's actually correct. So I thank you for making sure to add that. And KST is a known or suspected terrorist, just so you're aware. We were discussing that a little bit earlier when it came to the majority of KSTs being apprehended at our northern border as opposed to our southern border. So just be aware of that. But yeah, it's we can look at things at face value and say, well, that'll never happen, right? We're too far past any of those types of things, right? But you shouldn't put it past our enemies to have the level of influence in order to try to push something like that to occur based on what they would assume that likely outcome would be. And if we were to watch thousands and thousands of people who are in America, who have lives here, who have friends, family, associates, jobs, all kinds of things, be rounded up and deported or whatever it is that they would be, treated to, let's just say, I don't see that going well for the country when it comes to stability and division. So because that exists and because it could be used in that fashion and because it would probably have that type of an outcome, you might as well just assume it could happen. And that there are those out there who would like to see it happen specifically for those reasons rather than for the reasons for what it was intended for, right? And that's the type of situation we're in, at least in my opinion, when it comes to this 5th generation hybrid warfare scenario, which Poland is currently very aware of. And I can only imagine Poland being willing to say, anyone from Belarus has to go. And a lot of people in the Western culture would say, yeah, I get it, right? We could see why. But apply the same logic to, let's say, people of Chinese origin here in the United States. And how would that actually fly, right? That would be extremely contentious. So, thank you. I didn't get the acronym. No problem. If you have questions, feel free to ask them. If I don't get to you, someone in the chat probably will. But at the same time, I don't know. I'm trying my best here. Let's see here. So much rain. Yeah, I'm getting a lot of rain right now too. Do you think they'll have an attack during the Olympics since they're in Paris? I mean, I think if a organization wanted to make a political statement and wanted to get as much attention as they could for doing an attack, right, or something like that, then that would be a likely target for them. But I think that all major events like the Olympics always suffer from the same level of risk when it comes to that. So I don't necessarily think it's any different than any other major event, let's just say. And let's hope that nothing like that happens. But, I could see it being a target because it probably is, right? It just is naturally a target based on the amount of attention it gets and the amount of people who will be there and the amount of countries it affects if you were to actually perpetrate an attack, right? So, not perpetuate, since that's something that I couldn't stop saying earlier. Now, why did I bring up all that stuff about the Alien Enemies Act? For reasons, okay? For reasons. And, I would like to, yes, remember Munich, says Night of the Living Prepper. For all those reasons, I agree. Alien Enemy Act. I have a feeling, although that writer was very adamant about it being used in the sense of Iran and going into a conflict with Iran, and just so you're aware, there's a very strong political bias coming from the Center for Immigration, right? And we are aware of the fact that many in that party seem to really want to go to war with Iran. So maybe that's why they're trying to put together a plan for how they'll deal with it when that happens, right? But I'm not as concerned about that as I would be China, based on everything we've been witnessing, okay? So right now, this is from, let's see here, May 9th. China and U.S. resume cooperation on deportation as Chinese immigrants rush in from southern border. So this might tell some people, well, China's now helping, so this obviously isn't a PLA-funded situation. This obviously isn't something related to their military or anything like that, because now they're trying to get people back. Well, keep in mind that there are certain Chinese nationals here that aren't probably part of the PLA, right? Just like I said earlier, a lot of the people coming across the border probably have nothing to do with the malicious intent, but they're great cover for it, aren't they? And keep in mind that China is very strongly trying to reacquire any of their dissidents, right? China's going to try to get anybody back that doesn't agree with China, that makes China look bad. And so, of course, they're going to work with the U.S. on trying to get those people back because they need them to be quiet. So be aware of that as well. Beijing and Washington have quietly resumed cooperation on the deportation of Chinese immigrants who are in the U.S. illegally as the two countries are reestablishing and widening contacts following their leaders' meeting in California late last year. After China suspended cooperation in August 2022, the United States saw a drastic surge in the number of Chinese immigrants entering the country illegally from Mexico. U.S. border officials arrested more than 37,000 Chinese nationals on the southern border in 2023, 10 times the number during the previous year, further exasperating tensions over immigration going into the presidential election. In a statement sent to the Associated Press this week, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said Beijing was willing to maintain dialogue and cooperation in the area of immigration enforcement with the U.S. and would accept the deportation of those whose Chinese nationality has been verified. Well, good thing they're going to be able to vet who they decide to take back. Like I said, they have people in mind that they would like to get back based on how they feel about China. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said last month told the U.S. House during a budget hearing that he had an engagement with his Chinese counterpart to ensure that China would begin to accept removal flights so we can deliver a consequence for Chinese immigrants who do not have a legal basis to remain in the U.S. Actually, what he meant to say is that he's basically signing a prison sentence for any of the people that China actually lets him send back. And he probably made a deal with China in order to get in their good graces to send back any dissidents that they ask for in order to make himself look good like he's actually doing something when it comes to illegal immigration and get better favor with the Chinese government in order to probably enhance his portfolio. So that's what's happening there. Now, this is something that's causing a little bit of a ripple, right? And it's because it involves Donald Trump. So a lot of ripples tend to come from there. Lysander Spooner says, is the chair against the wall yet? Well, I don't know if we can say that per se. I think that things have changed when it comes to how this whole thing actually looks, right? And rather than the chair being against a wall, it's almost like the chair is away from the table. Does that make sense? So, what did Trump say? Sometimes it's good to see what these people are doing because we just heard what Biden was trying to do when it came to prioritizing people who are actually criminals and terrorists from being able to be, fully processed through our immigration system, right? Which, oh, you mean we're not doing that right now? Oh, okay, great. I think that's excellent policy, actually. But this is from military.com, which seems to have their bias as well. You can decide what that might be for yourself. Trump suggests Chinese migrants are in the U.S. to build an army. The migrants tell another story. Well, far be it from the migrants to tell you they're PLA plants and espionage experts who are being sent here for a particular mission. I'm glad they're fully honest with you and making sure that you're just, being told the other side of the truth. It was 7 a.m. on a recent Friday when Wang Gang, a 36-year-old Chinese immigrant, jostled for a day job in New York City's Flushing neighborhood. When a potential employer pulled up near the street corner, home to a Chinese bakery and pharmacy, Wang and dozens of other men swarmed around the car. They were hoping to be picked up for work on a construction site at a farm as a mover, anything that would pay. Wang had no luck. Even as he waited for 2 more hours, it would be another day without a job since he crossed the U.S. southern border illegally in February, seeking better financial prospects than he had in his hometown of Wuhan, China. What the heck? This guy came from where? Nothing to see here. Oh, man. Maybe that's why I wasn't allowed in the car. The daily struggle of Chinese immigrants in Flushing is a far cry from the picture former President Donald Trump and other Republicans have sought to paint of them as a coordinated group of military-age men who have come to the United States to build an army and attack America. This is from military.com, by the way. Since the start of the year, as the Chinese newcomers have been trying to find their footing in the U.S., Trump has alluded to fighting-age or military-age Chinese men at least 6 times and suggested at least twice that they were forming a migrant army. It's a talking point that is being amplified in conservative media and on social platforms. They're coming in from China, 32,000 over the last few months, and they're all military age and they're mostly men, Trump said during a campaign rally last month in Schnecksville, Pennsylvania. And it sounded like to me, are they trying to build a little army in our country? Is that what they're trying to do? I mean, I think that's a reasonable question. As Trump and others exploit a surge in Chinese border crossings and real concerns about China's geopolitical threat to further their political aims, Asian advocacy organizations worry the rhetoric could encourage further harassment and violence towards the Asian community. Asian people in the U.S. already experienced a spike in hate incidents fueled by xenophobic rhetoric during the COVID-19 pandemic. Trump's dehumanizing rhetoric and blatant attacks against the immigrant communities will, without question, only fuel more hate against not only Chinese immigrants, but all Asian Americans in the U.S. Cynthia Choi, co-founder of Stop AAPI Hate and co-executive director of Chinese for Affirmative Action, said in a statement to the Associated Press, "In the midst of an already inflamed political climate and election year, we know all too well how harmful such rhetoric can be." Okay, listen. This article is definitely trying to paint the Chinese nationals immigrating here as the victims, right? As the people who are just trying to escape tyranny, which I understand some of them most likely are. Don't get me wrong. But here's the thing. To dismiss this whole situation fully, especially from military.com, which, like I said, clearly has bias, but it just doesn't necessarily seem to give any credence to the fact that this is a real concern. This is a real concern. Where are these people going, right? From Wuhan, by the way. Where are they going? Where are they building these small armies? Where would it make sense for them to build a small army, right? Let's just take a look here. Oh, here we go. U.S. to force China-linked firm to sell land near U.S. missile silos. I wonder, do you think that if China-linked firms were to buy major amounts of land near strategic military assets, do you think that would be a good place to get these people to rally at or to maybe be processed through in order to find out where to go next? Like, I don't know. I'm just throwing out random ideas. But if I was trying to infiltrate a country from the outside and I could legally buy land there, and then I knew I could get people in illegally where they want to be vetted or run into any major concerns of having their identity exposed. And I could get them to, once inside, make their way towards some of my newly purchased land that is strategically placed near military assets. I wonder if that'd be a good way to position myself before any type of a major event. Just throwing it out there. This is from today, by the way. The White House on Monday gave a Chinese-linked company and its partners 120 days to sell property they had bought near a U.S. Air Force base in Wyoming that is home to part of the U.S. nuclear arsenal, citing fears of spying. The move comes as the United States has become increasingly concerned about the national security risks posed by Chinese-led purchases of American property near sensitive military sites. Why do they keep buying all this property? I don't know. Mine One Partners Limited, which is owned by Chinese nationals, partnered with other companies to buy real estate for cryptocurrency mining in June 2022, the White House said. The property is located within 1 mile of Wyoming-based Francis E. Warren Air Force Base, which is home to part of the U.S. arsenal of intercontinental ballistic missiles. The proximity of the foreign-owned real estate to a strategic missile base and key element of America's nuclear triad, and the presence of specialized and foreign-sourced equipment potentially capable of facilitating surveillance and espionage activities presents a national security risk to the United States, the White House said in a statement. Now, in case you're not aware, maybe you're not plugged into crypto, or maybe you're not much of a techie, or whatever it is, right? They bought this real estate for cryptocurrency mining. First off, you have to ask, why would they announce that, right? Well, they have to probably have a reason to buy this real estate, but also because of the power consumption that's usually brought on via cryptocurrency mining. Not to mention, well, the amount of bandwidth that they're going to be taking, right? Which would be trackable in the sense of using stateside networks in order to have access to the internet and everything else. So understand that they had to announce the reason for why there would be these obvious spikes in usage, right? But like was said by the White House, all of that would also be covered under the grounds of using this same style of technology for espionage, right? Surveillance and tracking and data gathering and everything else, right? So this is likely not a cryptocurrency mining operation. Although it might even do it as well, right? In order to have cover, might as well do that too. Plus, get some money on the side while you're at it. Just keep in mind, in case you haven't ever seen like a crypto mining operation, like if some guy does it in his basement, imagine like 10 PC towers all linked up and all like just filled up with GPU processors, and then a ton of like portable AC units blowing right on them in order for them to not overheat and explode. All right. So I don't know. It's interesting to me that the military.com article, which came out this week, by the way, is dismissing this whole concept that Trump is wondering if they're building an army here or not. And then immediately thereafter, the government has to force China to sell some of this real estate that's too close to U.S. strategic assets because, well, you know, we're just a little concerned about what it is you might be doing there. And clearly, you have access to high-end technology, and I wonder what else it could be used for. These are all things that you should be keeping in mind. I don't think the idea of us being invaded is too far of a reach. And don't forget, if we're being invaded by a foreign adversary, especially one that we are at conflict with, we suddenly have the Aliens Enemy Act in order to remove as many of those types of people as we want, which I'm not saying is a great idea. I'm saying it's a great concept for creating disruption, division, and social unrest. And that would be a very good thing, especially while in a conflict with another country, especially with a country who already has, I don't know, like a small army inside of the country. I don't always agree with everything Donald Trump says, but I'm not assuming he's wrong on that one. And let's not forget, presidents, former presidents, I mean, sometimes they keep classified materials in their garage or at their resort, right? So sometimes they have access to information we don't have. And sometimes they say things that are probably just objectively true, but they can't just tell you that for a fact because, you know, that information is classified. So be aware of that. Now, Robert Larson says Flecktarn equals hot for teacher. You know what? What's wrong with Flecktarn, right? So, don't forget, we have a cryptocurrency mining project right next to a strategic asset. We have the entire border being infiltrated by KSTs as well as Chinese nationals. And then we also have this daily reminder lately of U.S. espionage-based infiltration in our infrastructure that is being done by Chinese-led organizations like Volt Typhoon. And they keep telling us about this over and over and over again, okay? U.S. officials confronted the Chinese government in Beijing last month about a sweeping cyber espionage campaign through which Chinese hackers have broken into dozens of American critical infrastructure organizations, a senior U.S. cyber official said. Right? This is from Volt Typhoon. We're worried about everything happening with Taiwan when it comes to this. But this is the part I wanted to kind of touch on really quick, okay? Listen to this. And this is coming from the director of the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. So this is why I think it's important. And this article, by the way, is from May 8th, okay? So, it's unclear how many U.S. organizations have been compromised by the hackers, but any number we give you is likely an underestimate, said Brandon Wales, the executive director of the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, during a separate media briefing at the same conference. Chinese targeting of our critical infrastructure is broad-based, he added. It is against a broad swath of small and medium-sized companies that are potentially critical in individual supply chains or just capable of causing societal panic in some place around the country. And that's the part I really wanted to drive home when it came to this particular article. The goal doesn't have to be complete disruption or complete grid down or complete blackout, right? Which is something that a lot of us latch on to because it's kind of more accepted in the preparedness community as being like a big SHTF, right? But they might just want to cause societal panic. And it doesn't take long to create societal panic. And all they have to do is study a hurricane to see what that would take, right? So how long does it take during a hurricane for people to start looting? Well, if the water shuts off and they have no running water, well, we know how much water you need. You need it a minimum to drink in 3 days, right? And most people in hurricanes are unprepared. No matter what, they'll have a month's notice before a hurricane shows up. They won't even have a single bottle of water in their fridge or in their garage, right? Like they'll have nothing at all. It's just how people are. I can't explain it, but it is true. It will be a week to 2 weeks before complete societal breakdown or societal panic occurs in any area that has been hit hard enough with a storm that doesn't have immediate disaster relief and immediate boots on the ground, right? Now, cause that level of disruption in 30, 40 places around the country. Not many. It sounds like a lot, right? But 30 or 40 small towns around the country doesn't sound like a lot, right? But if those small towns start to have societal breakdown and societal panic because of the infrastructure suddenly going bad, it will spread around because those people will have to go somewhere else to get what they need. And then the people in those surrounding areas will have to compete for the supplies that they usually have access to. And that trickle-down effect eventually reaches larger areas. So, like I said, hybrid warfare is occurring. Poland is very aware of it. Poland's taking action because they know what's happening. We're aware of it, but for some reason we're allowing it, which should concern you, but should also tell you some things. And what can it allow for? Well, it could allow for our enemies to just strike at us from within very easily. But it could also allow for government overreach in some ways that could send us into an even more societal panic type scenario where Americans are watching other Americans or other, like I said, friends, family, associates being ripped away from their lives and suddenly disappeared based on a law that exists and allows for said removal. And if that was to happen, our adversaries would be cheering it on all day long because it would only cause more problems for us here, no matter how you want to look at it. And if you don't get rid of the people who might be malicious actors within the country, guess what? Got more problems on your hand. If you do get rid of them, guess what? Got more problems on your hand. We're really not having a lot of winning options these days when it comes to the solutions to a lot of these crises. I know it's crises. I don't care. I like the C's a little better. So, but this is why I wanted to talk about this. Look, you guys want to talk about solar flares? We can talk about it. Did the grid go down? It did not. Should you have at least been paying attention to it? 100%. Does it always present that possibility? Yes, it does. So you should have been topped off. You should have had some things ready. You should have been considering things like what's in your Faraday bag, right? Things like that. But it's easy to get carried away, right? It's easy to get carried away with the what if because the what if can be enormous. Could the solar flares have been a HARP experiment? You tell me. I don't know, but that's a thing. So look that up if you want. But what I am going to say is that this stuff is happening, like right now. It's happening in the country. It is occurring. The outcomes are generally bad, no matter how we want to look at it. And we're in a tight spot. And a lot of our adversaries have figured that out. They figured out ways to get us into a corner on a lot of different subjects. And you can apply this to the whole Palestinian protester thing right now if you want, right? Okay, college students are disrupting things, they're making threats, they're saying things that are hateful or derogatory or whatever. Okay, yeah, that's a problem. That's not good. We don't like that, but freedom of speech, we get it. Okay, well, let's make a law where we're going to send them to Palestine. What? No, that's not how freedom of speech works. I don't have to like these people or agree with them, but I don't have to agree with the idea of sending someone away because they said something they thought. That's how things are supposed to work in this country, right? So also, if you support one side or the other, then you're affiliated with one political group or the other, but you're not allowed to say something bad about one group or else the other group will not like you anymore. And if you criticize the actions of one group, then you aren't with the group that you thought you were with, right? Do you see how beneficial that is to our adversaries? To be in a situation where there is no standard of good and evil, right? There is no right or wrong. That's the best case scenario. When you can't easily and articulately point out like what's good or bad, game over. You can't win the game if you don't know who you're fighting against. You can't win the game if you don't know what the puzzle is you're supposed to solve, right? And this is something that's been perpetrated through modern media for quite some time now. Modern media loves the concept of there is no evil, right? Everyone's just misunderstood. So we don't have a standard anymore. And if you don't have a standard, you can't hold it up. And if they've removed the standards, well, then there's no structure, right? And believe you me, there is most definitely good and evil in this universe. No matter how much people would like to make you believe there's not, right? And when that line becomes blurred due to the actions of others, it becomes a lot more difficult to be on the right side when things are over, right? Bright Eye Security, good night to you as well. And thank you very much for being here. I appreciate you. So that's what I wanted to say. We're in a weird spot, right? But you all are amazing. I appreciate every single one of you. We do have the private live chat tonight, which is at 9:45 Central Standard Time. If you are a Subscribe Star member, which is $5 a month, you have access to the private live chat. If you are a YouTube channel member, you also have access to the private live chat. You can hit the join button down below and join up if you want to be part of the privates. I also do some exclusive content on Subscribe Star, as well as I do have a really cool giveaway type thing I'm going to be doing over there, which it's not a giveaway. It's a preparedness incentive. And I choose someone deliberately to receive it. So I'm using the wrong verbiage there, but it's not a giveaway. Keep that in mind. You know who you are. But what I'm trying to say is that if you want to be part of that, I just put the link in the live chat as well as in the description. And if you want to come hang out and be in the private lives, like that's a good way to do it while also supporting the channel. Don't worry if you don't have the resources to support the channel directly or just don't want to. I don't hide anything behind a paywall that's pertinent to your preparedness. I don't hide, information like what we just discussed. I don't hide good advice or anything like that. These are just casual conversations we have where everybody just kind of talks about stuff. It usually devolves into like gun chat, but that's just what it is. So if you want to be part of it, I hope you can be. And if not, I understand completely. And if you want to just hit the thumbs up, the subscribe, or even just come back next week, those things are free and they definitely help the channel. So I want to be part of the privates, says Sergeant Rudy. Well, make sure you hit the join button or join me up on Subscribe Star and you can come hang out. If you can't afford it, I get it, and I don't expect anyone to. But people who wanted to directly support the channel financially wanted a way to do it, and I wanted a way to say thank you, so I came up with a solution. Anyway, Bad Twin Customs, good to see you. Glad you're here. Anything else you all need from me, you can go to magicprepper.com. There's tons of resources there, mostly related to sponsors and affiliates that have discount codes for you. And besides that, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.